Well, I'm just back from the hardware store. I picked up some figure eights to finish up a project. It's a nice little end table combination wine rack. I think I'll use this as a prototype to build a couple more. I've got wood for a second one. Let's get started.
Welcome to Roby's Garage Workshop, featuring the craftsmanship of Roby Price. Wine Rack End Table, Part 1, First Dimension.
Well, here it is, serial number 001. It's an end table, and instead of having a drawer up here, we have a 9-bottle wine rack. I think that makes it a little unique, and I like the size of the piece. It's the right height, so it'll be right at the armrest of the couch that it sits next to. And I like the top size, enough room for a lamp, a book, and of course a glass of wine. We made this piece out of quarter sawn white oak, and I like quarter sawn white oak because it introduces a fleck into the wood which gives it a lot of character, and you can see some of this, and as we move through the video you'll start to see a lot more of that character in the stain. The first thing that we're going to do is to take this lumber here, some of which is somewhat cut up. When I made this one I bought enough for 2, so some of this lumber is already cut to size, but it hasn't been dimensioned. We're going to take it to the jointer, table saw, and the planer and get our first dimension. Hopefully we'll complete that today and we'll be ready for the drum sander tomorrow. So let's get started. Well, you can see some of this behind our prototype on the bench, and I've moved it over here to a sawhorse. This is my first staging area. I have another staging area on the other side of my tools. I'm going to be first dimensioning all this lumber all at the same time, and that is primarily to make sure that I have uniform thickness across all the pieces. Additionally, I want to stage it so I can lay it out and see what I've got. I am already starting to mark pieces to make sure that I have enough wood for all this. Going back to the lumber store in the middle of a build is not a good idea. Also, I have taken some time to select the best pieces for the items that get the must show. The tabletop, it's going to be plainly visible every day, and you want those pieces to be the best. But the pieces that hold up the bottles in the interior of the wine rack, you may not need to have top quality wood. Still needs to be oak, still needs to be the same color when you stain it and finish it, but it doesn't need to be quarter sawn, and you can save yourself some money there. So stage your wood, mark it, and get ready for dimensioning. Like all things, preparation makes the project go much better.
We're trying to illustrate a number of things in this segment. The first is, which side do you joint first? Generally, you want to joint the cupped face down. In other words, you want to joint off material from the front and the back of the board. Take the board and drop it on the face of the jointer. A lot of times that will tell you which side is cupped. Once you've figured that out, mark the center and mark the edges. Your first pass will tell you how much twist is in the board, because the edge marks will be jointed off accordingly. That will also tell you how much pressure and where you can apply pressure on subsequent passes. Finally, your markings on the board as to how it related to the rest of the project will be gone after you take off material, so mark the board designation on the end with a Sharpie. Don't apply a lot of pressure on the board on the first pass. All you want to do is skim the surface. That's the reason for pulling the shield back. I didn't want so much pressure on the board that the board would have pushed the shield out of the way. I just wanted to skim the board. In subsequent passes, this first pass will tell me where I can put my pads and apply significant pressure. Those are the areas that have already been trimmed out. Now that we've had our first pass, we can apply a little bit more pressure. And having gotten a flat face, we will mark the side that will go into the planer. We don't want to mix that up in the future. Mark the edge. And again, this is a first pass, so it's a light touch. And you may not have noticed, but I put the crown side down first, and typically I don't recommend that. It made for a lot of passes to go through. Be very careful when you do that, because if you make one pass pushing at the front of the board and another pass pushing at the back of the board, you can chase your tail on this. If you joint with the crown down, maintain pressure on the center of the board and make sure it's consistent. Now that you have one side that is perfectly flat, mark the final edge. That can be done on the table saw and then finally cleaned up on the jointer.
Well, everything's been through the jointer, and I've taken the time after I jointed this face to mark this face. It's always important to know where you've been. I've also jointed this edge here, so I know that these two are square because I checked my jointer beforehand. And I marked this up here. I'm not quite as worried about this right now. I'm going to handle that later, but what I am going to start with now is I'm going to face plane all these through the planer. And we'll get this down to dimension. The whole trick now is to take it down to just about 3/4 of an inch, or in case of the legs, about 1.5 inches. I want a little left because when we hit the drum sander, I want to have something to sand and not go beyond my 3/4 inch dimension. So we're going to get started with the planer now. Turn on the dust collection, and again, everything here will go through there and be staged. And instead of jointing these boards one at a time, I have to plane everything all at the same time because I don't want to be changing the depth on my planer as I go through this. So we will be generating a lot of sawdust.
The garage door is down in order to provide enough light so that you can see what's going on. This particular board was warped very badly, and that particular spot is actually the low spot on the other side, marked very clearly so we can see how the planer does. I will lower the planer down to the point at which the center stop makes contact with the board against the base, and then I will back it off again about a half turn. This will define the thickness for all the boards from a starting point. Note that I did check the distance between the end of the planer and the garage door. Not doing that could have been folly. Now that we take a look, we see that our marks are pretty good. It looks to me like we've got a good start here. This will define the thickness for all boards to follow on the first pass.
All right, I'm zoomed in here pretty tight, and that is to let you see the grain pattern in the wood. And I'm looking at putting these boards together, and granted I have looked at them, so I have an idea of what I want already. I've got a knot here. I do not want to see that knot. And I've got a pretty distinct line here between sapwood and heartwood. So I'm going to turn this over, and the good news is my knot disappears. And when I put these up next to each other, it looks to me like I've got a pretty good match pattern. On this side, I'm looking at a lot of sapwood over here, and even some over here. Actually, I think I've got more sapwood here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and move him over here. No. I think what I'm going to do is put this here and overlap it, because this green pattern in this region matches up closely with here. And I may trim this back here, and I'll trim that back. And if I do that, that'll be roughly about there. I only need 18 inches, and I definitely have it. So I will be jointing these two edges to get a good match, and I'll be trimming these back, and hopefully we won't have too much of this show up. That looks like a little sapwood there as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'll put this face against the fence of the jointer on one side, and this face against the jointer on the other. Even though I've got a good square edge, any kind of a deviation will multiply over a number of joints. So by doing that, I will cancel each other out. So I will do, here I will do a face and a face, and over here I will do a face, and over here I will do a face. And that will line up with the face, the fence of the jointer. So that's how we're going to manage that. Okay, so let's get busy and trim off some of these edges, and we'll get to the jointer.
Check the jointer fence for square just to make sure. I make it a habit of keeping it pretty square, so I wasn't surprised to see we were in good shape. Check the board to make sure our mark, that is the side that's supposed to be going against the fence. So now that we've confirmed that, we'll go ahead and take off a bit there. Let the burn marks on the wood tell you when you've gotten a completed joint.
All right, we're in very close quarters here. This is the third bay of the garage, and I don't have a lot of room. I wanted to show you my panel making jig. I've got two of the top pieces in the jig right now. They've been jointed and they're leveled out. No glue in it. This is simply a demonstration. Now what I'm going to do, let me put the third panel in and illustrate how this works. It's a nice jig. You put the third panel in, you have to be, the bottom rises up so the top will be right. And here's a caul. And this fits in like so. This will turn over and hold in place like that. And then you screw this in place, and these joints will come in tight. It pulls this way and it pulls that way. And a little bit of glue, these will self-center. I'm going to put some glue on this and get it in the clamps and let it cook for a while. I'll give it 1 hour. I'll take it out of the clamps. I'll scrape the top off, and then I'll put it back in the clamps to finish cooking. This will be an overnight thing, so we'll look at this tomorrow and see how we go. These two, I just did this one for demonstration purposes. So I'll get after this, and then we'll start looking at some of the other pieces and getting them dimensioned. Well, we're at the table saw, and we're getting ready to cut things to their final width. The legs are second. I've actually already cut the rails and stiles. We're going to cut the others, the rails and stiles, the 64th, and cleaned it up on the jointer. I'm going to clean this up on the jointer. I'm giving myself a 30-second because it's a little wider board, 3 times as wide in fact, and we'll need that width to do the overall cleanup. So basically, table saw is set up at a 30-second strong on the dimension, and we'll go ahead and make those cuts. I should be able to get 2 legs out of this. All right, I've got all my rails cut, got the legs cut, and the top is in the clamps and it's gluing up. I haven't taken it out yet to clean off the glue and then put it back in again, but that's coming. I've also got my material for my my corbels cut. Now it's time to start to get after the many slats. The slats in the side, the slats in the front, and of course the rails that hold the wine bottles. We're using not quarter sawn, but plain sawn white oak for those. The intent is to take that quarter sawn and turn it on its side, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of a flex show up in that. But this is going to be a lot of cuts, and I want to get the most out of it. So I'm going to be moving over to my bandsaw, and you'll see. Well, I'm over here at the bandsaw because I'm going to be ripping all my slats on this instead of the table saw. All this stock has been milled to 3/4 of an inch, and I've got a good square edge right here from the jointer. And what I will be doing here is cutting these or ripping these right at just under 7/8. And even at that, I'm saving material because I lose a full 1/8 of an inch on the table saw. So I'll rip it a little greater than, a little less than 7/8, and then I'll take this and I'll send it to the planer. And this is a bit of a dance because as soon as I make this cut right here, what's left of my stock has a rough edge on it, and I can't go back to this tool and do that. I have to go back over to the jointer. So we'll do the cut here first, and it's not much to see, but I'll show you anyway. And understand that as soon as this piece is done, the piece that's cut goes to the side. These pieces will go to the planer, and I'll put them in there, and we'll plane this edge flat, and we'll have a 3/4 inch square. This will go to the jointer, and we will square up this edge again so that we get something to rest against the fence that is square and even. So make our first cut. Well, I finished cutting up my sticks, and there's almost 40 of them. And of course I've done everything except the final dimension, which I will do in the planer. I have 3 sides which are square and flat, and those were done primarily on the jointer. But this last one will be done on the planer, and I'll start pushing sticks through the planer here in just a moment. This will finish up our first dimension. The legs are just about where they need to be. All the railing around the sides, the rails, they're pretty much where they need to be. And of course the tabletop is in the clamps. So we will get these to 3/4 by 3/4 tonight, and I'll clean up and stack it up so we can get a little airflow around it. And I will see you tomorrow morning, and hopefully we can make enough progress where you can start to see what this thing looks like when it's finished.